Hello and welcome to this session in which we will discuss a SOC 2 engagement, specifically discussing management responsibilities. A SOC engagement is a service organization and control. In the prior session, we looked at SOC 1. In this session, we would look at a SOC 2 engagement, specifically about management responsibility. So what is a SOC 2 engagement? A SOC 2 engagement is an audit designed to evaluate a service organization system and the effectiveness of its control relevant to security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, or privacy. These criteria are established by the AICPA. They are based on the called Trust Services criteria, and they are established by the AICPA. In a SOC 2 engagement, the management of the service organization has several critical responsibilities before starting the work with the service auditor and during the engagement. And this is what we will discuss in this session. In the prior session, if you want to know SOC 1, you could look at the prior session. At the end, we'll touch upon SOC 3 as well. Let's go ahead and get started. Before we proceed any further, I have a public announcement about my company, farhatlectures.com.
Farhat Accounting Lectures is a supplemental educational tool that's going to help you with your CPA exam preparation as well as your accounting courses. My CPA material is aligned with your CPA review course such as Becker, Roger, Wiley, Gleam, Miles. My accounting courses are aligned with your accounting courses broken down by chapter and topics. My resources consist of lectures, multiple choice questions, true-false questions, as well as exercises. Go ahead, start your free trial today.
We're going to start by defining the scope of the engagement, and everything I'm talking about here is management responsibilities. So, management must clearly identify the services provided to clients as these services form the basis for the audit, so services provided. The system in use, they need to specify the system utilized to deliver these services, which include both technological and procedural aspect. Report, they must choose between a Type 1 report, which assesses the design of the control specific to a time period, or Type 2, which evaluate the effectiveness over a defined period, over a period of time. You have to identify risk. Management should identify potential risk posed by business partners or external services that could impact the system. Also, management will have to be engaged in planning and risk assessment. For example, timing, they need to determine the relevant date for Type 1 report or the specific period for Type 2. This is part of planning. Impact of external services. If external entities provide services to the organization, management must evaluate how these services affect the organization's ability to meet its service commitment and system requirement. They also need to decide if these organizations are what? Sub-service organization, are considered sub-service organization. And we have a whole session on how to determine whether we have a sub-service organization or not. And why is that important? Because we need to include sub-service organization. If management decide to include sub-service organization, now they must choose between two methods: the carve-out method, which exclude the sub-service organization controls from the audit, and the inclusive method, which include them. And those were discussed in another recording. Now, for the inclusive method, they must secure an agreement from the sub-service organization to participate in the audit, because they might have to test the control. Also, the auditor will have to do what? Selection of trust services categories. Management must select which trust services categories: security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, or privacy, that will be included in the audit scope. It could be 1, 2, or all 5, based on what's most relevant to the services provided. Also, specifying principal service commitment and system requirement. Management needs to clearly outline the main promises made to their clients regarding the services provided. And what would this involve? This would involve detailing the essential system requirement necessary to deliver these services effectively and securely. Okay, so defining system requirement for business partners, they must also specify key system requirement linked to commitment made to business partner. This include outlining what's expected from the system to support and fulfill these relationship. Also, management will need to do what? Involve in risk identification and analysis. It's crucial for management to actively identify and analyze potential risk that could hinder the organization from meeting its service commitment and maintaining system requirement. And this process involved understanding the various threats and vulnerabilities that could impact the system performance or security. Also, designing and managing control. Management must develop and implement controls that are appropriately designed to manage identified risk and ensure they operate effectively. Notice, we identify the risk, then we want to make sure we are mitigating that risk. This is especially relevant for Type 2 report, where the effectiveness of these controls is assessed over a period of time. Also, management is responsible for ongoing operation, monitoring, and documentation of these controls, and this includes ensuring that the control continue to function as intended and modifying them as necessary to respond to changes in the risk environment and operational needs. So the objective, the bottom line, is to provide reasonable assurance that the service organization can consistently meet its service commitment and system requirement. Those are important: service commitment and system requirement, according to which criteria for SOC 2? Relevant trust services criteria. Also, management will have to provide a description and provide an assertion. Basis for assertion: they must have a reasonable and justifiable basis for their assertion to ensure it's credible and supported by evidence. Again, here we're going to have to do risk identification. Management needs to identify any risks that could prevent the organization from fulfilling its service commitment and meeting the system requirement as described, and this involves a thorough risk assessment process. Also, the assertion must be in writing alongside the system description, and we talked about system description in a separate recording. Management must provide a written assertion. Now you might be saying, you keep telling us the same thing again and again. Yes, when we look at a report, we talk about assertions, we talk about description, we talk about assertion and description separately. Now we're talking about management responsibilities, which is also part of the report, but we're talking about it separately. They all complement and supplement each other. Yes, it's the same thing again and again, but again, as you listen to these lectures, you're going to understand the big picture, and on the exam you need to answer practically easy multiple choice questions, I have to say, based on the released questions about SOC 1, SOC 2 report management responsibilities. So it's okay if you listen to it again and again from a different perspective. It's going to help you. Back to the lecture, this assertion, which should accompany the description. So the assertion will have accompanying the description, confirm that the information presented fairly and in accordance with the applicable trust criteria. Other list of information that the management is providing for Type 2 report: it's crucial to design, implement, and document control that effectively manage the identified risks that are capable of providing reasonable assurance. Access for service auditors: management must provide the service auditor with complete access to all relevant information. This is during the audit, such as records, documentation, service level agreement, and internal report. They must also be prepared to supply any additional information to the auditor request and facilitate access to personnel to gather necessary evidence. Think of it as a financial audit, same concept. Also, we need to provide written representation, and we're going to be discussing those a little bit later in details. At the end of the engagement, management must provide written representation to the auditor confirming all relevant information has been disclosed and is accurate. Also, support for internal auditors' assistance. If the service auditor decides to use the internal audit for direct assistance, management must provide a written acknowledgement. Simply put, they have to acknowledge, they should state, they should clearly tell the service auditor that the internal auditor can follow the service auditor's instruction without intervention from the service organization to ensure independence of their work. Because sometimes what you do is you rely on the internal auditor at the service organization, and you have to make sure they are taking direction and following the direction. Other thing that management is responsible for is making certain disclosures. Well, during SOC 2 engagement, the management of the service organization has specific disclosure responsibilities to the service auditor. What are they? Incidents of non-compliance and fraud. Management must inform the auditor about any instances of non-compliance with laws and regulations. We saw this in SOC 1, and any fraud or any incorrect misstatement that are significant and could impact the users that impact the users of their services. They should also confirm whether these incidents has been properly communicated to the affected user entities. Same thing as, you guessed it, SOC 1. Also, intentional act impacting the system description or control. Any known intentional act that could negatively affect the accuracy of the system description, the design of its control, or the effectiveness of the control, especially for Type 2 report, must be disclosed. And this include both suspected as well as confirmed incident. Deficiencies in control design. Management should report any known deficiencies in the design of their control. And this involve acknowledging areas where controls may not adequately address the risks that they are supposed to mitigate. Additional disclosure would involve operational failures of control. It's important for management to disclose any instances where controls did not operate as described. Why? Because we want to highlight any failure in the system that might affect the service delivery or data integrity. Also, any significant system incidents, management must disclose any of these incidents that have significantly impaired the organization's ability to meet its service commitment and system requirement. For a Type 1 report, these incidents are considered as of the description date. For Type 2, they are considered over a period of time. Subsequent event, what do we have to do for subsequent event? Any significant event that have occurred after the period covered by the system description but before the issuance of the audit report. So we're done the work and there's a period until we issue the report. So this is the subsequent period. This is the work done and we have a time of period before we issue the report. These events could potentially affect the validity of management previous assertion about the system. So these disclosures are also crucial for the auditor to assess the completeness, accuracy of the system, the design of the operation of control, and determine the overall integrity of the service organization, operational and compliance environment. If there's anything that happened during this subsequent event, we have to maybe adjust the report. Talking about SOC 2, let's move on to SOC 3 engagement. SOC 3 engagement, the responsibilities of a service organization are similar to SOC 2 because basically SOC 3 is another version of SOC 2 with one key difference is you don't prepare a system description because the audience are not looking for that system description. So similar responsibilities, management must still ensure that controls are suitably designed and operated effectively, disclose relevant information, and manage risk effectively, basically what we saw, but they're also responsible for providing all the necessary documentation and access to the auditor because it's the same thing as SOC 3 is the same thing as SOC 2, except no system description needed. Where a detailed system description is a critical component of the report of SOC 2, SOC 3 engagement, this detailed narrative is not required. So SOC 3 reports generally are less detailed, are intended for a broader audience, and that's why they are less detailed. Versus SOC 2, we talked about this early on, it's more designed for people with knowledge, individual with specialized knowledge. That's why it's more detailed. However, for SOC 3, well, the individuals, they are not required technical or operational knowledge versus SOC 2, they are knowledgeable. They understand the nature of the system, the controls, how they all interact together. SOC 3, that's not the intent. Let's take a look at this multiple choice question from farhatlectures.com. In a SOC 2 engagement, which of the following would management need to determine when identifying subservice organization? So once we have a subservice organization, what do we need to determine? We need to determine whether we are using the carve-out or the inclusive method. So whether subservice organization are using carve-out or inclusive method, I would say yes. The financial stability of the subservice organization, that's not our concern. The geographical location, that's not our concern. The marketing strategy of the subservice organization, that's not our concern. So in a SOC 2 engagement, once they determine whether this vendor is a subservice organization, the next thing is, are we going to include or exclude the carve-out method or the inclusive method? And the reason I posted this question to remind you that the carve-out and the inclusive method will be tested. So you need to know under what circumstances do we use, or under which circumstances do we need to use the carve-out versus inclusive. What criteria, what factors do we look at if we're not sure that might influence us using one method over the other. what should you do now? You want to go to Farhat Lectures, look at additional MCQs. That's going to help you whether you're studying for your CPA exam, especially if you're studying for your CPA exam, Information Systems and Control section, or some other certification. Invest in yourself. Good luck, study hard, and of course, stay safe.